Okay, so everyone can see the screen, the document? Give
Yes.
like a, thumbs up kind. Okay. Um, just as a brief introduction, uh, we in some ways face uh, the subject of death every day, just about. In the news a lot of times focuses on things that are tragic or on wars or conflicts or crimes and so we're exposed in that way. And also a lot of the media, movies, shows, all kinds of things, and all depict uh end of life in a very dramatic way, usually in some kind of a violent way, in cop shows or these kinds of superhero things. But when it really comes time to talking about our own death or the death of our loved ones, it's a very difficult thing to do, and people shy away from it. And it's harder to do that for people who are closer to you than people who are a little bit more removed. And because maybe, we feel our own sense of mortality at that point, or the feelings are kind of overwhelming and don't want to face them. But it's, it's a reality that we all have to face. And it's really better to be prepared and to start talking about these things beforehand. So before the time comes, it's better for the person whose life is ending, and of course all the people who are around, their loved ones as well. That helps with the transition. And so that's really the first heading is about conversations, having the conversations about death. I've seen all kinds, a whole range of people's responses and reactions to these, to death and dying, their own mortality. Some people have the whole funeral planned and everything, ahead of time, and some people will not admit that they're dying at all, even to the end. And that can create a lot of problems for the people who have to, take care of their bodies and mourn for them afterwards. So that's the initial thing, is, as soon as you start talking about it, and then you find it's not quite as, difficult as you might think it is. And if it is, so it is, so you just feelings, you kind of have to welcome them, and they pass through. So one of the things that we talk about with our loved ones is our final wishes, what we call final wishes. And that usually means how you want to be buried. So in people who stick to the Jewish tradition, it's not much of a conversation, because it's assumed that you're going to be buried in a cemetery, and in a Jewish cemetery, and that's like the end of the discussion. Well, nowadays we know that cremation has become more common in with Jewish people, and there are these other kinds of things also, what we call an above ground burial in a, I think we call it a mausoleum, but there are different kinds of mausoleums. One is a mausoleum is a building that surrounds a grave in the ground. And many of our famous rabbis, especially in Israel, are buried either in a cave, in the ground, in a cave, or have some kind of a building over it, like Heber Rachel. Rachel's tomb has that, and others as well. The famous one now, Shimon HaTzadik, his grave in what they call Sheikh Jarrah, that controversial place, also has a building around it where people go and they daven in there. It's a holy it becomes a holy place. But what we're talking about here is a drawer that people get put in. From talking to people, that want that, some people have an aversion to going into the ground and having their body decay in the ground, or having insects on it, or being in the dark, or these kinds of things. And even though you say, okay, you know that you're not going to be in your body and you're not going to know, it's just your lifeless body, there's something, in a person's psyche that they're afraid of that. So that's why people consider that. And a green burial is something that's a little more maybe a newer phenomenon, although it's probably very ancient also, is to go out in the woods, to find a spot somewhere in a pasture, in a field, on a mountain, and dig your own grave and put your loved one in there. And that is, it's on the, people are doing that sort of thing also. So I'll just say that for the latter, that in Jewish tradition, we bury in a consecrated cemetery. That is, you go to a site designated as a cemetery. There's at least a minyan that gathers there. You make a proclamation, and there, excuse me for a second. Sometimes we study some rabbinic text there, and then we make a declaration that this is a consecrated burial ground, and we say Kaddish Rabbanan, and then it's designated that. A Jewish cemetery is only for Jewish people, and that's what's considered consecrated ground. As far as the cremation goes, we try to discourage people from being cremated. In more modern times, which could say like after the Second World War, many people say that it's an aberration to cremate because the Nazis, cremated so many of our people, and that is, so that's just something in addition. But the prohibition against cremation is ancient, and even it's observed by others. Ancient, Roman historians, notice that the Jews are different than other nations because they bury their dead in the ground. And it comes from two verses in the Torah. One of them, where the Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Adam Harishon, Adam, he says, you came from the earth, this story about the human being fashioned from the earth, and unto the earth you will go. And that's the first verse that is the basis for burial in the ground. And then later on in Deuteronomy, another verse to reinforce that, which says, Tikbor tikborenu, that you shall surely be buried, which reinforces that mitzvah. So the commandment for burial in the ground is duplicated in the Torah itself. It's not a rabbinic law. It's a law right from the Torah. We call that dioraita. And so that's how it became ingrained in traditional Judaism. So many times when there is a cremation, and when people come for that request, they say, I want to honor my parents' wishes. They said that, they wrote it down, whatever they told me, they wanted this. And actually in the interpretation, the rabbinic laws say that even though your parent tells you that's what they wanted to do, you are commanded to bury them in the ground. And this causes a lot of angst with people. They feel guilty. How can I go against what they wanted to do? They told me their final wishes, and that's, so what we we try as hard as we can to convince the people to be buried in the ground. And that's why these conversations are important to have before the time comes. And sometimes you can have as many conversations and they still say, no, that's what I want to do. If the time comes and the child say, they just can't, get themselves to bury in the ground, and they want to, they think they're honoring their parents' wishes. Well, there is a ruling about it, which is this, that you're not supposed to tell, if you're having a rabbi officiate at the funeral, you're not supposed to tell the rabbi you're having the body cremated. You're supposed to be sort of oblique about it, because if the rabbi knows that that the body's being cremated, he or she is not supposed to officiate, because it's against the Jewish law. It's against the halacha. So that's it's something that you should just know, that, that we don't tell the officiants. We try to work with people, of course, at their time of loss. And so we, bend and that sort of thing, and try to be as flexible as we can. And when it comes to that, but many of you know that that's happened in our congregation, and we deal with it. We deal with it. But officially, you're not supposed, if it's going to happen, the body is supposed to be there at the funeral service. And then afterwards, if the family is going to have the body cremated, then that's like, at least it's after the funeral service is over. Okay, so that, being said, we, suffice it to say that we try to convince people, not to do that. There is a tshuva that one of my rabbis wrote. He's a Holocaust survivor. He lost his whole family except his sister. And he wrote a tshuva which permits burying the ashes in a consecrated Jewish cemetery. And if you want to look at it, we can, but it's even like, for him, whose whole family was, burned in the ovens, he still was trying to be sensitive to people in their time of loss, and that we try to somehow make within the framework of Judaism something that will be like comforting for them. Okay, so let's go on a little bit. I'm sorry I dwelled on that, but it comes up a lot. We have interfaith families. What happens when that non-Jewish person their time comes and it's time for them to be buried? They can't be buried in a consecrated Jewish cemetery. So what we have done in Gan Marasha, next door, we bought 12 plots. It's right on the other side of the hedge. And we said, we now have a place for interfaith families. They can be, buried together. And at least that we have that we have that area for them. Okay, as far as the other two goes, it's very important to have medical directives. Nowadays, there are all kinds of things, there were tshuvas written about life support systems, and that you're not, what happens when, I don't want to get into that right now because it's a whole nother discussion, but it's part of the conversations that you have to have earlier on to make sure that you have a medical directive. A will, an ethical will, is good too, very good. And I mean, I have a family and I'm talking to them about their loved one. Can you tell me what their life message would be to you? if you could put it into like a couple sentences, and not that many people can actually do that. So that's why it's good to have your own ethical will. And also to write down other things about your life and your family, things that your survivors might not know. Maybe they never asked. Maybe you never had these conversations. So if you have some kind of a biography that you could start working on, then when the time comes, it's like easier for everybody, the family, to put together some kind of a eulogy that's meaningful, and that a lot of the information is there already. Okay, so and you would think that a will is, you don't have to say a will, but sometimes people come to the end and they don't have a will. It's like it does happen. So if you don't, have one, you should definitely, or some people like to update them. All right, let's go on a little bit. This is the next heading is when death is imminent. So the most important thing as far as this goes is to contact the rabbi, and that any time, of day or night, that you call, we were going to post the numbers. So because there are a couple of things. One, usually people at that point need a little support. And the other one, as we see here, it's very important to say the vidui prayer. And that's the confessional prayer before you die. Usually when it comes to that point, the person cannot actually say the prayer themselves. However, you're actually supposed to say the prayer yourself. And if you can't, because you're just lost the ability to speak at that point, or for whatever reason, there's a version that somebody can say for you. And it's very meaningful to the person and to the family as well, to gather there at that point. And there's a little ritual that you say. It's for, these moments are ones of transition, and that we try to help the person transition from life to death. And the comfort, the medical treatment, whatever we're giving them, your presence, the prayers, whatever you're doing, the music, this is all to comfort the person and allow for them. So the vidui prayer is actually very effective for that, even though it's a kind of a stock thing, that sometimes those prayers are very comforting. And then, of course, for the family, just to go over the process of what to do, what comes next, and to make those things. Usually, just as an aside, we try not to talk about tachlis things in front of the person who is on the verge of death. So, you don't talk about the funeral. Sometimes you have a family, the person is not imminent, but you're all having a family discussion about what's, how the funeral is going to go, how the arrangement is. That's different. When the person is at that point, it's just a different kind of time, and you have to be more sensitive to the person, to their neshama at that point. So we don't really talk about that stuff in an area. You go outside, in the hallway, in the room, somewhere else, and to talk about the tachlis things. So what to do with the body when death actually comes. So hopefully you've made some arrangements ahead of time and you know what funeral home that you're going to use. The reason that I only put the David C. Gross Funeral Home up here is it's the only Jewish funeral home that we have in Pinellas County. And, even though we know the other cemeteries that there are other funeral homes and we have funerals through them also, but they really don't know how to do it in the Jewish way. And so it's okay, but it's not like going through a Jewish funeral home. I have to make another comment about that, which is, David sold the business to a bigger company a few years ago. And when he sold the company, they all met with us. Like there's a regional director and some other, they all flew in to sit down with the rabbis of Pinellas County and to assure us that they're still going to be considerate of the Jewish families in the area and maintain services for the Jewish community. So in the meantime, David has still been the funeral director at most of the funerals, the Jewish funerals that occur through that. It's still called David Segor's Funeral Homes. But for the arrangements and all that, you don't talk to him. You'll talk to the other people who work for them. Lisa is one person, and I forgot the other one right now. But David has been present at the cemetery, or actually at the funeral itself, and he says, in order to make the families feel more comfortable. At that funeral home on Central Avenue, which they used to have in Belcher, but they don't anymore. So they built, actually, the people who bought the company from him, they designated a separate room in the funeral home for Tahara. They made that investment. And before it wasn't, but they did that in order to show us that they recognize it's important, and they were investing in the Jewish community and in our area. So what David did a few years ago was he offered to the other funeral homes their room for Tahara, but they would have to pay for the transportation there and back. The other funeral homes will tell you, yes, we know how to do that. We know we know the ritual washing and all that, but I don't think they really do. They don't. We have a Chevra Kadisha, the men's and the women's, and they really only can do it at that site. So that's why I only put his number up there, because the ritual washing, the Tahara, is important. It's part of the process and the way that we give kavod, honor, to the mate. The mate is the Hebrew word for the body, and that we have certain rituals for respecting kavod hamet, respecting the body. That this is we were made in the image of God, and so we use that as a metaphor, really, for giving thanks to this vessel that the soul is put in, and so we treat it with kavod, and there are customs that follow that, and one of them is that in the Jewish tradition we really don't have viewing of the body. The funeral home will do it for you if you ask, but in the Jewish tradition, it's considered not. It's considered disrespectful to the soul for people to look at the body without the soul in it, and so that's why we don't have that viewing that others do. Okay. One of the things also, sometimes there are there was some kind of a son, like an accident or something, that like a sudden death, and that the the medical examiner will want to do an autopsy on the body to find out the cause of death. So in most cases, it's not really necessary. And we have appealed to the medical director to refrain from autopsy unless it's really something that they have to do, and they have been accommodating for us here. Okay. So that brings us up to this point, which is to contact the rabbi. Sometimes it's coordinated through the funeral home. Most of the times it is, because they only have certain times that they can fit in their schedule when the funerals are going to be. And so there's a coordination between the rabbi and the funeral home and the family to set the time for the funeral service. But the rabbi would usually appreciate that the family first, talk to the rabbi and went to talk about the timing of it. In traditional Judaism, there's a custom to bury. It's actually one of the laws of burial, of kavura, that within 24 hours, the body has to be buried. And the reason for that is because in times when we didn't have these modern methods of refrigeration, that it was considered nivul hamet, disrespectful to the body, to let it go. And so that's why we put the body in the ground as soon as we can. Nowadays, we're spread out, dispersed all over the country or other places, and people would like to come, on the airplane to be there for the funeral and afterwards. So we delay, and it's something that's been, more common, but still we try to make it as soon as possible after the death. And also for the family, that it's hard to be in that state of oniyut. Oniyut is when you're like in limbo before the body is buried in the ground in the funeral. That at that time you're supposed to be getting ready for the thing, but we understand, Jewish, tradition understands that that after a loved one dies, you're like, time stands still, or you're like in a bubble, and so you're not obligated to any of the commandments while you're in that state, while you're in onin. So, that's for your parents, your siblings, your spouse, those, God forbid, your child, and in those categories of relations, then you're in that state. And for those close relatives also, those are the ones that you're required to mourn for Shiva and Shloshim and those rites of after the burial, those customs as well. So just to go to that last point there, that you contacted a funeral and family meeting to prepare the eulogies. This is a very important thing. And during this past year, of course, we haven't been able to get together in person. So we've done this on the Zoom. And believe me, it's better than just the telephone. So because at least you get to see the people. But I always try to encourage as many of the family members to be there at that meeting as possible, because the deceased, they have a different relationship with everyone. Sometimes if a person is granted a long life, sometimes they say things to their grandchildren that their children never knew. And and so it's good to include, those people. They have something to say. Oh, they never told me that. I didn't know. And you hear these things, and it gets your memory going as well. And so those, and oftentimes those meetings of the family before the funeral to talk about the deceased are very meaningful, and oftentimes the most meaningful part of the whole process as far as the mourning process goes. So suffice it to say, we try to get together for that, to prepare the eulogies, and then also at that point, to the family meeting, we'd try to coordinate shiva and the meal after the funeral, and those kinds of things that the community joins in support of the mourners. So that's just we're going to take some questions, but I just want to mention at that point, it's we can talk a little bit more about shiva and shloshim next time, but that when somebody, when somebody has a loss, and we always make jokes about the food and, Jewish people and this sort of thing, but people don't really know what to do or what to say. And if you don't know what to say, then it's better not to say anything than something that's trite or something that's, an axiom that you've heard before. Better just, be there for the person. But also it's important to welcome the comfort that other people are trying to show. And sometimes you're like, I'm all right, I'm okay, I don't need, we got plenty of food, I'll go to the grocery store. Well, fine, we all have cars and can go to the grocery store. But the main thing is that people need a way to care for the mourners. And that it actually does, even if you have too much food, it feels good that people, are showing that they care about you. And you see people who come to the house for shiva and all that stuff. It's really, so the point is that you to welcome that from other people who are trying to try to show their comfort. Okay, so hang on a second. Are there, okay. Okay, so here's one question about the, if you have the questions, you can write them in the chat, or you can just, ask. So this is a question: can you talk about it, how the body's not left alone at the funeral home? Okay, so at the funeral home, there's, it's called shmirah, and shmirah is, means guardianship, or to guard. And so there is somebody who's supposed to be with the body at all times, day and night. That's a shomer, and until the body's buried. So the reason for it was, as we said before, up until modern times, we didn't have a way to really protect the body, and we didn't want like critters to get the body. So the shomer was really, that's just the practical aspect of it, but it also serves the purpose of what we say kavod hamet, being respectful to the body. And even though we might not be afraid of that, happening, that's still a way to show kavod hamet. And so in front of the body, you're not supposed to do certain things, like study Torah or eat a sandwich And so one of the things that one of the jobs that rabbinical students get is shmirah.
Rabbi,
Yes.
we have a question. What if the body is being shipped to another state after the funeral is held in Clearwater?
You mean as far as shmirah goes?
They didn't specify, they just asked about being shipped to another state.
Okay. All right. So hang on. This is let me just finish this about shmirah. So you're traditionally people the shomer recites Psalms from the book of Psalms. You're allowed to catch a few winks if it goes if there's shomer through the night, but you can see if the funeral is going to be 5 days from and it's a paid position to be a shomer. It's a paid position. So what happens if the body is shipped to another state? You know, I'm sure that there are instances where there's a shomer that goes with the body, but usually not. That they just ship the body to another state. You make, like, for instance, the funeral home here would make arrangements with the funeral home where the body's being buried, and they know how to do that. Take it to the airport, and they have a special arrangements for that, and it actually happens more often than not.
May I ask a question to clarify?
Go ahead.
Okay. If a funeral is held in Clearwater, but the burial plot is in another state, how does that work?
Could you say that again, Dorothy?
If someone is living in Clearwater,
Yes.
and they die, and the funeral is held at Congregation Beth Shalom in Clearwater, but the burial will be in a cemetery in another state, how does that work?
Yeah. So that's the practical aspect is the same. That is, the funeral home makes arrangements and they fly the body up there. However, there is like a separate matbeya that is collection of prayers that are said only at the burial. So if you have a funeral service, you say certain things like the El Mole Rachamim, and you're not supposed to say Kaddish actually until the body's buried. So it's just split in two parts. Nowadays we've done a lot of funerals, most of them probably graveside, and we just do both the eulogies and everything and the kavura all at the same time. So they fly the body up there and they skip all the other parts that are done. Even if they're eulogies, you don't have to do a eulogy at burial. You say the prayers that are necessary, El Mole Rachamim and Kaddish.
Is that done at the funeral, or is that done in the burial in another state?
In the other state, the certain prayers for burial itself, the El Mole Rachamim and Kaddish. Okay.
Thank you.
We have another question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
What does Hever Kadisha mean? No, not what does it mean, but what does it do, the Hever Kadisha?
Right. So, the Hever Kadisha is very important, like the most important organization in the Jewish community. If you have going to a new place, like, when the pioneers went west or wherever, you always have to have a Hever Kadisha first and a cemetery before a shul, because it's part of the life cycle, and you got to have a place to bury your dead. So the Chevre Kadisha, Chevre is like fellowship, and Kadisha is from Kadosh, from Holy. So it's like the holy fellowship. and they're the ones who take care of the body. In previous times, they also took care of the cemetery and digging the graves and all that, all the practical stuff. And nowadays, mostly in the ritual washing, doing the ritual washing. So we have, and we're always looking for, new volunteers for that, a men's group and a women's group. And when there's a Jewish person dies, that it's the funeral director, it has been, calls either the men or the women, the lead person for each one.
There's another question. There was a question about your cell phone number, if you were missing a digit. If you could post it again in the chat, just to make sure everybody has it right. And after that, a Jewish burial in a pine box, is it really a green burial? Is really a green burial, isn't it?
1 second.
No problem.
I think I got it now.
Okay. And then Ruth Rog asks, a Jewish burial in a pine box is really a green burial, isn't it?
I guess you could say, I guess you could say that it is, yeah. But as far as I have been to, sometimes I get called to do officiate at a funeral where they're not members and I don't have contact with them before. And I show up to the cemetery and there's a coffin that's not kosher with all the golden, fittings on there and stuff like that. So the reason that it's supposed to be a plain pine box, without any nails or screws or that sort of thing, is that it disintegrates quickly, and that the body can go back to the earth, and that the coffin is supposed to have holes drilled in the bottom of it so that the body supposedly touches the earth. Yes, you may know that in Eretz Israel, they don't have coffins at all. They put the body in a shroud and it goes right into the ground. And so, in Florida, technically, it's not kosher to put the coffin in a cement vault and put it into the ground. When I had seen it before, because in Connecticut and some places, they have to do that too. But in other places where the ground isn't stable or that sort of thing. And so there had to be a tshuva that was written that if the state law requires you to have a vault, you have to have a vault. And that's it. There's, Dina to Malchut Dina says in the Talmud that if we're living in the diaspora somewhere, we have to follow the laws of the place that we're living. So we have to do it. But I understand when you mean that it's kind of a green burial, but that there are people, Jewish people who are, you don't have to pay for a plot, you don't have to pay for this or that. It's not just the money, but it's like just really going back to the earth. You go out in the woods somewhere and you just bury your dead out there in the ground.
There is some place in North Tampa, in Pasco County, actually, that is a green burial place.
Oh, it's designated?
Yes.
Oh, so what do you do?
The Starkey area, near Starkey Park. I haven't been there, but I've heard about it, and it is advertised.
And what do people do? Go and dig their own hole?
No, I don't think so. You have to agree to be put in there. It's just that you put in the ground, I believe. I will research it before our next meeting.
Without a coffin
We'll
or
be up
anything?
that way tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay.
We have another question.
Okay.
What if the person is an organ donor? How does that affect this if they're an organ donor?
Okay. So traditionally, according to the Jew, we say traditionally is another way to say, according to the Jewish law, you're not supposed to sever any parts of the body before burial. And even if before a person dies, and God forbid, you should lose a limb from illness or accident or something, you're supposed to bury that part of the body. So, Kal v'chomer, after the body's, you're not supposed to separate it. There is this, it's part of this mystical idea based on Ezekiel's dry bones thing, and that you have to have all your parts together when when Mashiach comes and all the righteous are resurrected, that you have to have all your pieces there together. But look, if God's going to do that and put us back and breathe in, he can do anything else. He can find us a new eyeball or this or that. So there are the modern tshuvot that were accepted by the Orthodox. It's not just a conservative tshuva that was written about it, but and it's not universal, but it is accepted more in Orthodoxy and of course in conservative to be an organ donor. And that's considered a way of preserving somebody else's life, and that's a mitzvah too. And so we permit that. We permit that.
Rabbi, I have a question. What about, again, heaven forbid, stillborn babies that are born stillborn, or tiny little babies that have only lived, a short amount of time? Is there anything that's specific traditionally for that?
Well, the traditional thing is that a baby is not considered a viable human being until it passes 30 days. Now, that might seem like a lot to us right now, but in the times, before modern medicine and the infant mortality rate was high, it was more common. So they didn't require burial in the traditional way like that. So, they didn't require you to mourn, but burial was still required.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We have another comment. This is from the Woodrows. Who are the lead persons for Hever Kadisha at CBS? Both Paul and I were on the Hever Kadisha committee at Beth Shalom in Columbia, South Carolina, and we may be able to participate here with a refresher tutorial. Now, is the Hever Kadisha, are they actively looking for more people, and how would you go about volunteering your services?
Yeah, we're always, looking for more people. And Batsha and Johanna, maybe you could, do you want to speak on that?
Johanna just unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah. Number one, the Hever Kadisha, both male and female, are countywide. It's not synagogue centered. For many years, it was chaired, well, it still is at the moment, by someone in St. Pete. We have had a chair here. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us. Ina Colin, for many, many years, was the organizer originally, and then the chair. So the whole objective is that when we are called, we don't necessarily know the mate. If it's someone from our congregation, obviously we do. But we go to perform the last mitzvah And we're very conscious of that. That it's the last honor that can be given to the person who has died. It's a very, well, that wasn't the question you asked, Diana. You asked how to join up.
Right. Johanna,
Um,
could you tell us who the lead person is for the men and the
For the
women?
men, I do not know.
Is it
We
Joel?
usually have an annual meeting, which obviously we have not had for the past 2 years, where we all get together. But it may, the women's chair at this point is Ellen Getz.
Yes. Mhm.
And I think that, I know Joel has been the men's chair. I don't know if he still is or not. I suspect he is.
Yeah, I thought that they both were. So let me check in with them.
Um,
And we'll-
Elion just posted a response.
and he says Joel and Ellen Getz.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And we also have an answer about the green burial. Heartwood Preserve is a natural cemetery within a 41-acre conservation sanctuary located in the Newport Richey area. And that's in the chat also.
Okay.
And
And
Rabbi,
Rabbi-
I don't see where your phone number showed up on the chat anywhere. Did anybody else see Rabbi's phone number on the chat?
Oh, I put it, ended up in a direct message here.
Oh, that's okay.
Here we go.
And I also wanted to mention that if anybody needs to reach Rabbi David for a family emergency or someone has passed, if you call the synagogue after the office is closed, the message does say if you need to contact Rabbi David, and it gives the cell phone number for him.
And it's now
Okay.
posted in the chat.
Okay.
Rabbi David, I just had one question. You had talked earlier about a Jewish cemetery, that was necessary to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. And so at Sylvan, there's a Jewish section. Is that how we handle that? It's, the cemetery is for people of all different religions, but we have a separate section that's a Jewish section at the cemetery there.
Right. Our Gan Marasha is a consecrated area.
Okay.
And I'm assuming that the one for Temple B'nai Israel and Ahavat Shalom, which are next door to us, that they're also consecrated. And then there's one called Beth David, which David Gross just bought plots over there, that's also a consecrated area over there.
Okay.
Yeah. And we have also in, what's that place on Indian
In
Rocks Road?
Largo?
On Indian
Oh,
Rocks
yeah.
Road?
No, Almerton, isn't it?
Well, Chapel Hill, yes,
Oh, yeah.
for sure. Yeah, Chapel Hill is also a mixed cemetery, but we have consecrated areas in there as well. And, but I'm thinking of that one, now it just escapes me. Oak, what's it called? You guys know what I'm talking about? It's on,
Serenity Gardens.
is on Indian Rocks Road?
Yes.
So we, I think Aline Jacobs' parents are in there, and we consecrated that area in there. In a place that was designated in there. Yeah. And then Curlew Gardens, I think, up there, because we have done some up there as well. All right, so what happened over there at Serenity Gardens is that the family thought that it was a Jewish cemetery, but then there were other stones, monuments that appeared with crucifix on them, and it was evident that it was mixed. So we made a mechitza with some shrubs and you can make it with stones as well. That it doesn't have to be very high. It just has to be a designated area, enclosed area. That's a way that's separated from the others, and that it's called a tefach as a handbreadth, and so you only need like I think it's 3 handbreadths high of a mechitza in order to cordon it off. It's usually done with hedges or something, but to separate the area off. Okay. Are there other questions on these topics?
It was very informative.
Okay. All right, so
There was one more question. Can you buy a plot before you die in a Jewish graveyard?
Of course.
Oh, certainly. And that's what we encourage you to do. Next week, Paul is going to join us, and Paul Applefield, who's our director of our cemetery committee, and that he's going to explain some of these kinds of things and some of the financial aspects of it also, because all that you have to be prepared for ahead of time as part of planning. But it's just it's very important to be prepared and to have things paid for and ahead of time. And it's a lot. It just is. I just got this letter in the mail today from David C. Gross Funeral Homes. Actually says funeral homes and cremation centers, and because they got to make a living, and it's a survey, and fill out these questions over here, and if you fill it out and send it back, they're going to give us a final wishes organizer, a little booklet with how to do all these things. One of these questions like this: do you maintain up-to-date biographical information and accurate family records to assist you or a loved one with funeral planning? Do you currently have life insurance that is allocated for funeral arrangements in the event of your death? So I'm going to fill this out and get my planner, and but it's important. So I'm going to also talk about Shiva and those kinds of things next time, and Kaddish and saying all that, and Paul will talk about those other practical aspects.
Last question. Is David Gross Funeral Home in St. Petersburg? And I believe it is.
It is,
Yes.
on Central Avenue. Okay.
Johanna?
If I may just add a comment, one of the earlier questions, I think, was about transporting a mate to another community and Shemira. I think in some cases, in many cases, members of the family who are here may go with the mate to whatever community. Probably there are family burial plots. And effectively, while the coffin is not within view, but effectively, I think that can be understood as the honor of Shemira during the time of transport. That's from personal experience. So that was just a comment.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Johanna. Okay, everyone. Thank you for
Thank you.
joining me.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's very
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
thank-
much.
Rabbi Dave.
Good night.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi.
Very informative. When you asked about it, I didn't think anyone would come, but I'm so glad that we had such a good response and certainly can share this with other people. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, recording is stopping.